Hey, real quick, everyone. So, I just wanted to talk about real quick. You'll hear people say that 70% of emissions can be attributed to 100 companies. So, that is not correct. It is 72% of industrial emissions, which account for 21% of global emissions, which is a much different number that I wish people would realize what they were saying. But still a lot. But night and day difference in percentages there. So 72% of 21 is 15%. Still a lot of global emissions. But I'm not sure if people realize the type of companies they're talking about. This is, did I say what the report was? It's the Global, what's it called? Carbon Majors Database, Carbon Majors Report for 2017. Well, just the headline itself, it says 100 fossil fuel producers accountable for nearly 1 trillion tons of greenhouse gas emissions. Now, of course, that number is referring to a very large date span, not, 1 year. I think it's that what that 1 trillion number is talking about, like back 100 years, I think, something like that. Because I wanted to talk about what the actual numbers are, but just judging, they actually don't list the companies, all of them in just the report. I'm sure I could find it somewhere. But it's 100 companies. And these are massive, a lot of them state-owned or partially state-owned. And, these are companies that have hundreds of thousands of employees. So I wasn't able to get an exact number of how many employees that spans. But just to do like an estimate, if each one of the companies has 20,000 employees, that's 2 million people we're talking about. And if each of the companies has, on average, 100,000, that's 10 million people. So just a lot of people. It's not just companies, emitting. This is a lot of people, a lot of productivity, producing a lot of products, things that keep our world empowered. But people have become obsessed with that number as like, that's what we need to do, is stop these corporations, I guess. So just for comparison, it's not really that, like, if you think about the way statistics work, it's not really that surprising that if you take the top X number of anything, it's going to account for a decent percentage. Like, we've seen that, the top 1% holds like 40% of the wealth or whatever. That's just the way that's just the way numbers work. You can look at like the NBA, the top 3% of scorers account for whatever, 20% or 30% of points, or what have you. But like another way you could look at this is if you just look at China. Let's see, just for instance, so China is, so that's, before we were talking about 100 companies, now we're talking about one country. This includes in industry, obviously. So, the 100 companies, I think the biggest one is actually Chinese. I think it's China Coal would be included in this because it's, an amalgamation of electricity, industry, agriculture, transportation, and like residential emissions. So one country accounts for 30%. So before we were talking about 100 companies accounting for 15%. Now we're talking about one country accounting for 30%. And if you look at the US and China, that's 42%. So two countries accounting for 42% rather than 100 companies accounting for 15%. So, I mean, you can go around the world and find you could call it. I mean, one way is to look at them as polluters, or you're just the top, the most productive companies, the biggest, the people doing the most work. It's not like they're just out there polluting willy-nilly, right? They're creating products. They're creating everything that enables the modern lifestyle, the modern world. So just wanted to kind of put that in perspective for people. But the main thing is that it's not 72%, or it's not 70% of emissions. It's 15% of emissions, which is very much different. And just keep that in the context of, how you could say, oh, well, screw the China and the U.S. Why do they take up 42%? So, you can divide that any way you want your narrative to sound. You can spin it so that someone looks bad. But you have a lot of people, just like with the U.S. and China, you have a lot of people. That's why that's part of the reason you have a lot of emissions. Obviously, USA is like one of the biggest consumers per capita. China, not so much per capita, but part of it is that a lot of people consuming a decent amount of electricity or energy consumption. There you have it. You're gonna have they're the top dogs. So likewise, if you look at the biggest companies, most amount of people, most amount of processes, and most energy intensive, it's going to take up a big percentage of emissions. So that shouldn't really be that surprising, or like alarming. Are we going to shut down all 100 companies? I guess that's what people are implying. I don't know if anyone actually would come out and say, like, just disband them, and just see where the chips lie. I don't understand why you would do that, but okay. Anyway, hope you learned something.